Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
It is July 27th, 2020. This is episode 67. The Popo No-Go. I'm pretty proud of this little...
Yeah, that's
probably don't even know.
Rhyming. It's a little
Yeah.
ditty. Popo No-Go.
Popo No-Go.
Also sounds like, hey Kathleen, it also sounds like some sort of anime character.
It really does. And I'm well versed in such things. So
Yes, you are. You're an expert.
Yeah. Quite the weeb, as my son would say. So for those who aren't familiar with us, I'm Mark Van Steenwyk. I'm the director for the Center for Prophetic Imagination.
And I'm Daniel Wolpert. I direct MICA, the Minnesota Institute of Contemplation and Healing.
Yep.
And yeah, we're still transmitting. We're noticing sort of a slight decrease in our resounding popularity.
Yeah, and there's probably, we took a big break, but you were telling me that some people weren't able to get their comments through. So I'm wondering if there's some sort of disconnect there too.
Yeah, we did have one episode that a couple people messaged me that they were having commenting problems, technical difficulties.
Yeah, so if you're watching or listening and you try to leave a comment on Facebook or YouTube and we don't respond to it, odds are it didn't go through. So if you could maybe message one of us or message either MICA or the Center for Prophetic Imagination, give us a heads up. That'd be good.
Yeah. I don't know that we can do anything about it, but it's
at least
good to know.
Knowing is half the battle, as G.I. Joe says. So today we thought we'd kind of check in about the state of policing in Minnesota, and I'm assuming this is reflected elsewhere too. But some long ago, somewhere in the middle of the pandemic, we had the uprising in Minneapolis in response to George Floyd's murder, and there was a lot of energy towards defunding the police and
abolishing the police,
some sort of extreme reform of the police, and the city council
changes.
Yep, and the
city council had a big party.
We're going to get rid of the police and start something different. And there's still some energy out there, but it's definitely become a very uphill, slow battle with lots of double speak from the political folks. Yeah.
So then basically next to nothing has happened. The one very significant thing that did happen, of course, was that, these 4 officers were fired and they have been charged with crimes. And that was great and very historic and different. Of course, we'll see what happens into the future, but that was great. And then there was all this enthusiasm by the city council. We're going to change everything, yada, yada, blah, blah, blah. They've put forward this charter amendment, which could actually be the subject of an entire other thing. But and then the budget hearings came up, right? So there's this emergency mid-year budget hearings, and the city council is ultimately in charge of the budget. I mean, the mayor proposes the budget, but the city council has a lot to say about writing that and rewriting that. And, this could have been a great opportunity to actually get serious about taking a big chunk of change away from the cops and redirecting it towards economic development, towards mental health, towards housing, towards, all the kinds of things that we know actually make the city safe. And our great leaders in all their glory redirected 1.2% of the police budget to other things.
That's talking about defunding.
Yeah.
Now this is
because of the pandemic, of course, city resources are down, and so at the same time that they made this massive transformational shift in police budgeting, they also made massive cuts to things like housing, welfare, mental health, big chunks of change out of those things, which to begin with are much smaller amounts of the budget to start with. I mean, the police is by far the overwhelming chunk of the budget.
Yeah, Gus comments. They got fired, but they're collecting their pensions. Derek Shelvin is the richest guy in jail.
Yeah. Right. So exactly what Gus is pointing out is that, yeah, despite being fired, there's loophole in these kinds of things that allows them to continue to collect their pensions. Although he may end up not being the richest guy in jail because he also has now been indicted for tax fraud.
Womp womp.
which is kind of hilarious too. Yeah. Oh, this is Kathleen. Nice comment.
Yeah. I think people thought you were saying refund the police. Oh.
Yeah, maybe that was it. It was a misunderstanding of the chant.
Yeah.
That D got changed to an R in all of the hashtags.
And speaking of the police, just to add in the other layer of, so all this energy, and the one thing that has increased is more freedom to criticize the police for whatever that is. And so it's interesting. I've noticed a few things that are getting more attention. One is now it's probably over this number now, but apparently 150 of the MPD were all applied for disability. So there's kind of this exodus.
We're talking about. I'm not sure. This report was through this lawyer that made this claim that all these people were considering doing this.
Okay.
It's not really clear that that's happened or is happening.
And regardless, it's like trauma happens to those who traumatize others, and I'm not downplaying how stressful and trauma, all that. But when you have people are talking about 150, that's a political statement more than that's a message. And there's other kinds of messages, of course, we've talked about the police dragging their feet and responding to things. So that's been part of this counterreaction. So even as we haven't really gotten enough traction at all to change the way we think about and do policing in Minneapolis, the police and the police union is really throwing their energy, kind of having variations of a hissy fit. Meanwhile, for some reason, my news feed blew up with the fact that, and I don't understand why this is a big deal, but people did graffiti at the US Bank Stadium that was anti-police. And so somehow that's all in the news. And of course, the news loves to always paint this as though even when they're being critical of the police, it's trying to show that how necessary the police absolutely are. So it just shows the long slog ahead for this stuff.
Yeah, what's interesting to me about the business of all the folks filing for disability because of PTSD is that, I took the opposite message away from that of what was being presented, right? So to me, what that proves is the way that we're doing this entire thing is messed up.
Yeah.
Right? So if this is an institution and a job that, because of how it's being done, is making all of its employees sick with a traumatic mental health problem, then we need to change the way this is being done, right? There's something wrong with that. But the message that everybody else was taking was like, oh, see, you're going to lose all your police officers. And I was sort of wondering as they were talking about this, like, well, so what are you saying? Like, so all these traumatized people should stay on their job and keep being traumatized and doing their job badly? I mean, it just wasn't clear to me what the issue was, when to me the obvious issue is, okay, this proves that there's a problem here. that we need to change the entire way this is being done.
Of course, this is part of the American psyche that has been cultivated, is with all these, when soldiers come back from war with PTSD, the response isn't, oh, we need to figure out maybe we shouldn't be so militaristic.
Right.
It's, we need to make sure we honor them for that sacrifice they just made.
Yeah.
Mostly with lip service,
exactly.
because the Republican Party talks that game, but is really not good when providing benefits through the VA and stuff.
No.
But it is placed into this thing of like the sacrificial martyr who's being mistreated by an ungrateful populace. A few comments coming in. Mark writes, as much as I am pro-union, I cannot support the police union. Yeah, I don't.
Yeah, I mean the police union and unions and the National Association of Police Unions, you know, is severely problematic in a lot of ways, and a lot of what they seem to be up to is, you know, very intentionally undermining reform. And, you know, sadly, I mean, this is not just a problem with the police union, though. I mean, this could be a whole other topic of conversation, which is what has happened to the union movement in our country.
Mm-hmm.
In many ways, as the union movement was very successful, and a lot of their demands became institutionalized and codified into law, you know, things like, you know, the 40-hour work week and Social Security and, you know, all these other sorts of things. Sadly, a lot of unions have shifted to being in the business of just job maintenance at all cost. And that has not been helpful. And the police union are definitely doing this big time. All right, let's continue on with our comments.
Kathleen writes, I've heard that we have some of the Fed's secret police here in Kansas City, supposedly to solve murders. Mm-hmm. That's another fascinating piece, the way that the federal government has been engaged in protest stuff, which has always been the case, but a little history lesson for folks. The first big thrust towards federal supporting of policing came under LBJ. That's the first time we started seeing federal funds going towards militarizing police through a federal model. So this isn't, again, LBJ is like it's supposed to be one of the Democrat heroes, but this has been going on for a while, and now it's just terrifying because we're using these protests are being used to kind of fuel this narrative of the fear of Antifa, which we've talked about so much that the fact that people even need to hear that drives me nuts.
Yeah, and you know, with the militarization of the police and the creation of Homeland Security and all of these very shady federal police entities, the federal law enforcement presence around the country has shifted to those groups and away from what used to be the favorite federal national law enforcement organization, which was the FBI. And of course, J. Edgar Hoover really kind of used the FBI as sort of his, you know, personal police department, and, you know, harassed all of the big figures of the civil rights movement, of the anti-war movement. I mean, federal officers were involved around the country from the late 1950s all the way through almost the 1980s to undermine movement work and arrest and harass and murder activists. So this is part of a long storied tradition, actually, and
Gus writes, Seattle defunded their police by 50%. And Colorado got rid of qualified immunity statewide. So
now, Gus, I'm not sure that actually passed in Seattle. I know that they were trying to do that. That was one of their stated goals. I don't know that passed. But we could look that up for sure. Yes, Colorado. Colorado was on this right away, and they got rid of the qualified immunity clause. And that was we talked with Max and Sarah on Friday, and this the small town of Greenwood, where they had these protests, was trying to undermine that law. But that to me is, and again, when we talk about pressure points and systems that we can really engage to force change, this is one of them, right? This idea that if police were forced to buy individual liability insurance, just like doctors and lawyers and all kinds of people have to do in their profession, that would really up the game in terms of the issue of accountability. Because now a cop like Derek Chauvin, who had 17 offenses against him that were being covered by the city, probably could not get insurance, and so therefore would not be able to be hired as a policeman. And so, yeah, I mean, that was a great thing. Colorado got right on that, and it would be great if we did that here.
Is it significant that institutions like the University of Minnesota have divested from the MPD, or does that make no difference at all? I'm kind of curious. Like, I've never looked at the numbers of how much revenues, like I know the school district talked about, I don't know if did it pass?
Yep.
It's all blurry in my mind. So the school district at the parks talked about it, and that didn't pass in terms of rebranding and reframing the parks police. But I don't know how much difference these things make in the overall scheme of things, especially economically.
Yeah, I mean, they are a percentage of the budget. They're not a huge percentage of the budget. I think it mostly sends a symbolic kind of message that obviously other institutions in the community are unhappy with the police, and I do think that it has sent that message. But does it really result in the shift of a great deal of funding to other kinds of public safety? Not really. And in fact, there was just an article a couple days ago about how, the schools are now simply turning around and hiring kind of private police people instead of public police people. So even within that institution, it doesn't necessarily seem to be causing a great reimagining of how they understand school safety.
No.
But we'll see how that goes. No.
Bobby writes, PTSD, per the government policy, is a pharmaceutical drug model. So will they be requiring their officers to be on psychotropic medication?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I mean, I don't know what they can require. What the term is talking is that these people are trying to supposedly get on disability and get off of the force. At that point, whether they're on medication or not, who knows? But yeah, so
I think it'd be helpful if the police were usually stoned a little bit on weed most of the time. So it'd be nicer to engage, I think.
Yeah, right.
Or something. Mushrooms also probably would take away some of the violent instincts.
Microdosing while driving around.
Drop a little acid to be like, man, I'm sorry to pull you over because your car has so much color coming out of it. Have a nice day.
This is taking on an interesting direction here, Mark. Okay.
Series Wright said, do the topic on unions sabotaging themselves and reinforcing labor aristocracy. We could totally talk about the unions and
that would be a great one.
Comment from Mark: the skill with which the oligarchy co-ops all things for itself through the use of narrative control is why we need prophetic voices that never cease speaking truth to power. This is what happened with the labor movement, in my opinion, turning many of the big unions into co-opted tools of owners and management. This absolutely extends to the police, who pretty much only exist to protect and serve the whims of oligarchy and capital. I had my car broken into while it was parked in my driveway, and comments that are too long usually get cut off by the system. So now we have no idea what happened with your car.
Right, right.
But I can kind of guess.
But go ahead and throw up a second comment there. We can find out. And
yeah.
Right. This process that you're talking about of those in power co-opting narrative, co-opting institutions. Yeah, I mean, this is the age-old process, right? And for those of us that are, following in the Jesus tradition, I mean, this is as old as the prophetic text of the Hebrew Bible, and that is always what is happening, right? Is that the king is continually co-opting the tools of the nation for himself, right? And what's very what's very funny about this is one of God's greatest speeches in 1 Samuel is when God is arguing with the people about creating a king, and God lays it all out. And God says, this is what the king is going to do to you, and lists all this stuff. And it's absolutely hilarious, right? It says, the king's going to steal your land, king's going to steal your money, king's going to take your kids, send them to war, kill them, going to take your animals, on and on and on and on and on. You don't need a king. You don't want a king. Like, do not do this. It's like that sign in The Wizard of Oz, I'd turn back if I were you. And the people are just like,
we want to be like everybody else.
We want a king, just like everybody else. Just completely ignores all of the warnings. And so God is just like, okay, fine. You get a king. And then the next 3 chapters are like, and the king did all the stuff that God said the king was going to do. Stole all your shit, abused you, did all this stuff. It's very strange. Okay, we now get to find out what happened to Mark in his car.
I had my car broken into while it was parked in my driveway and was robbed of several hundreds of dollars worth of possessions. The police officer didn't even take the time to write a report, but let a kid steal a pack of gum from the local Walmart. That's right.
Yeah. Of course, one has to wonder why you had several $100s worth of possessions in your car. Yeah. See, that's the individualistic, moralistic view of crime. This was all your fault, Mark. And now you're trying to blame it on the police.
This is the thing. Like, it's amazing. It's amazing how much, like, again, as I eavesdrop on Nextdoor, and how people will just always want to blame victims if the person is like, if it's a little old lady white lady in the neighborhood who is surveying, and like she'll call the cops on anyone who looks suspicious to prevent this, and everyone's like, yes. But if someone in this case, if you're a liberal or a radical and you have stuff in your car and it's taken, you had it coming because you're defunding the police. That kind of way of thinking.
That's right.
Fascinating.
Exactly.
And that's the other thing that I've seen, like this narrative shift, jumping back to the narrative thing. For a while, I understand the city council had pressure to defund, but it didn't take long. Like, I mean, you're not hearing most people beating that drum anymore. It's the same people that were saying it, like those of us who were saying it a few years ago. Right. Most people seem to be like, well, we need this to make sure we reform. Okay.
I mean, the narrative has completely swung the other way because we've been hearing this constant drumbeat of, oh, now there's more crime, right? Yes. See, you hurt the police's feelings. They went away and hid for a little while. Now there's more crime. Now you've got to have the police back. And we've been having our little, white tears neighborhood meetings going on here over in my neighborhood, and apparently the last one. I mean, I don't go to these things because I just can't even handle it. But apparently the last one, yeah. I mean, people are now sort of turning on each other, and some people are like, well, why don't you call the social worker if you're worried about what's happening in your neighborhood? And they're insulting each other, and it's this, the rats turning on each other on the sinking ship, because the leaders, there's no leadership going on. And rather than do the analysis that blames and understands what's happening at a higher societal level,
Yep.
people are just frustrated, right? And so they just say, fine, let's just go back to the status quo.
Look, it's Catherine. I wonder if Adam's lurking somewhere back there too. This is a wall of moms meme. There's a wall of moms meme circulating this week, basically yelling at people calling for defunding the police as being too radical, saying we are damaging the cause and making it easy for the right to attack us. This is an old tactic, I know, but really disheartening to see people who were at abolition protests a few weeks ago sharing it. I mean, this is the thing, and this gets down into performance culture, whiteness, all kinds of shit. This is why it matters nothing when a white person says and does the right things for a while. Is because ultimately, most people know that your generic middle-class white person is going to do what is most comfortable and convenient for them in the long haul.
Mm-hmm.
And so rhetoric is cheap. Knowing what the right things to say is cheap. At the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, if you really who's the police working for? And even though Mark Tibbles had his car broken into, the police tend to work more for white people than other people. And we really have to question, what are we willing to give up in order to have justice for our neighbors?
Yeah, and it just, the power of comfort, I think, is just something that we can't underestimate. That when you are comfortable, right, and when you own stuff, and when you've got this whole system that works for you, and so you get uncomfortable for a little while. I mean, the number of white folks that I've heard say some version of, oh, wow, this is really tiring, engaging this racist stuff, for weeks on end.
It is tiring, and I get the same. I understand that feeling, but it's just interesting how people will not have no perspective.
Well, right, have no perspective. So it's okay, so what does that sound like to a Black person where that's their entire life and their kids' lives and their parents' lives and their grandparents' lives? And, you don't even have the intestinal fortitude to deal with it for more than a couple of weeks, right? I mean, that is a testament to the power of comfort.
And this is where a shift has
easy for.
Oh, sorry. You cut out?
No, I mean, it's just so it's very easy for the powers that be. It's very easy for the powers that be to take advantage of that.
That's true.
To take advantage of that, and just to kind of push either a scary narrative or a business as usual narrative, and eventually you gotta be like, okay, yeah, I like being comfortable. I think that's what I'll go back to. All right, let's.
Just real quick. This is why it's so insidious. This sort of happiness, politeness narrative within white culture, because what happens is if you're only showing up on the streets to protest something because you want to have a good view of yourself, you want to be on the right side of things and do the right performance stuff because you want to be a good ally. It's that kind of positive social image of yourself. Eventually you're not going to stay there anymore. You have to somehow deep down inside believe that there's something in it for you to dismantle this shit. You have to believe fundamentally that you've been fucked up as a white person, that our society is fucked up by whiteness, and that you have to long for something better, not just for your black friends, but for yourself too. Otherwise, then it's just going to be kind of a nice rhetoric thing, like, oh, this is the nice thing to say right now. And then as soon as it's not convenient and not nice to say it, and it's when your friends start saying all cops are bastards, fuck the police, defund the police, then you might go away because it just seems too harsh all of a sudden.
Well, and you have to find a way of coming back to that longing,
Yeah.
right? Because even if you have that longing once or for a week, that can go away, and you have to find ways of coming back to that longing,
which is what makes
and
this
sustaining
spiritual.
that.
This is why it's deeply spiritual. It's not
Yes.
merely political when we talk about this stuff. Kathleen writes, I watched the Malcolm X movie Saturday. In one scene, he said that the white sheets had been traded for police uniforms. I somehow missed that when I saw it years ago.
Yep. Yep. That's one of his great lines.
Julia wrote, tell the truth, Mark. Rhetoric is indeed cheap. It is. And then I realized I'm sitting here giving rhetoric, and it is cheap. Mark writes, worth noting, I was living in a lower income starter home neighborhood built with Section 8 funding at the time. That makes sense. I was far more upset by the lack of police response engagement than I was about losing some stuff. Yeah, context matters. And the police were much more present in a proactive seeming way when I lived in a slightly nicer neighborhood than now.
That's a great.
Did I miss the beatitude of blessed are the comfortable?
Right. Yes. Hashtag blessed.
How to, Julia, right? This is a big spiritual political question.
Yes.
How to help people recognize the self-interest in ending white supremacy. I honestly believe that this is one of the core spiritual questions of our time in America, because as long as until we can get to that point, we're not, just to be Christian about it, we're not preaching the good news. There's no gospel for white people unless they're being liberated from something. You cannot get millions of white people to be in solidarity with the oppressed purely out of altruism. It doesn't work. Not mere altruism, like, oh, I want to do the nice thing. They have to be desperate for it, and we have to. That's our work.
Hey, Mark. So I have an idea.
Yeah.
Let's do that as our topic tomorrow.
What's the topic? The gospel for white people?
No.
Sure.
How to help people recognize the self-interest in ending white supremacy.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay.
And Gus writes, looks like you're right. Seattle apparently is defunding by 1/5. Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's still...
Well, 1/5 is still not better than 1.2%. All right. Julia likes the topic for tomorrow, so we're sold. That's what we're going to do. And thanks all for being here and for commenting. We just love that. It's just tons of fun to interact with all of you. And we'll see you tomorrow.
See you all tomorrow, everybody.